Hello and welcome to the first MachineMax International Women's Day podcast. I'm Amy Law and I'm the marketing manager at MachineMax, and I will let my team of colleagues introduce themselves. So shall we start with Justyna?
So my name is Justyna and I'm the People Operations Manager at MachineMax.
Juliet, Senior Customer Success Manager at MachineMax.
Who's going? I'm going next. Okay. Shweta, hi everyone. CEO and founder for MachineMax.
Jennifer Thompson, look after the growth side of the business.
So we are obviously all identifying as women and all work in technology and in construction / mining, heavy industry. So I think that makes us statistically fairly rare. So I did a bit of research this morning. And it looks like in technology, 28% of the workforce are women, and in heavy industry, so talking construction, infrastructure, mining, it's somewhere between 12 and 20%. But those numbers haven't really changed over the last 5 years. We're seeing like percentage increases every year. And I think that that's why the theme for this year is equity over equality, because if we think about definitions, then that means that we're looking to enable people. So I think maybe a good place to start this podcast and discussion is to think about what we all think equity means. So I'm going to pick at random as we do these questions. So Juliet, do you want to go first and tell us what you think equity is?
I think you nailed it. I think to me, equity is enabling equality, right? It's the things that you put in place that allow equality to become a reality. So equality is sure everyone gets the same opportunity, which in general is a fairly easy thing to do. You can look at hiring more women, that's great, but that doesn't necessarily enable them to be at the same level as their male counterparts. So equity for me is the enabling of equality. You can't have equality without equity.
Like that. Anyone else want to add anything?
You should talk about the example you gave about the elephant and that.
So yes, yeah. So we were talking about examples of equity and like how do you actually define equity? And one of the things we were saying was that you could give the opportunity to do the same task, but the people might not be able to do that same task. So a good example is the task is climb a tree. The people who have the opportunity to do that are a monkey and an elephant. Obviously, a monkey is going to have much more of an ability to climb the tree than the elephant is. So equity comes in the idea that you need to give the tools to give both of those animals the chance to do the same task. So another good example is the task is that two people need to look over a wall. So let's put myself and Shweta, right? I'm almost 6 foot. Shweta is not. So if you said to us, okay, Shweta and Juliet, the task is you need to look over this 5'6" wall, I'm going to do it like that. I don't even need to go on my toes. But Shweta doesn't, even though she has the same opportunity for the task, it's not equitable. So Shweta needs a stepladder, and that makes it equitable. We can both do the same task. You just need the stepladder and I do.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're less capable of doing the task. It just means you need that extra element.
Yeah, just giving the resources to achieve the goal.
Yeah, I think what we're getting to is equity is a means to get to the outcome, which is equality, right? And I really like what you said, Jen, about the shoe thing. That so I'm going to butcher it completely. So you should say it. No, but you should say it.
You can give everyone a shoe, but it's actually giving everyone the right fitting shoes what matters.
Yeah. So I think this is something, and to your point, Amy, when you were mentioning about the numbers, and we were discussing before the podcast that the overall number is 28% we're talking about, but when as we go senior higher up, it becomes lesser and lesser and lesser. And this is something what we consciously did it in MachineMax, that there is women at every level. And it's not just women from ethnicity, diversity standpoint. Today we are talking about International Women's Day, but in general we talk about diversity and inclusion, and that is quite important in MachineMax as such. And if you see sitting here itself, we have senior level people, we have mid-level people, and we have junior people who are there right now doing the hard work, and we are here to take credit, of course. But yeah, so we always talk about it's not just about women in general, but where do they come in and where do they leave, and how do they retain and make sure that they do go through the ladder throughout.
I saw a good quote earlier that said, "You can't be what you can't see."
Yeah,
And I think that's a really good kind of thing to hold, isn't it?
very true.
Yeah, if you want to aspire, then you have to have someone to inspire you. So
Yeah.
you're kind of talking about that. Okay, so
Awesome.
equity, we're all good with the definition of equity. So I suppose it's having a think about where we might see those typical equity challenges, and maybe we don't just need to do it for women because, there's lots of equity needed for all sorts of people and team members. But yeah, maybe let's have a think about what that means for us at MachineMax or in our experience and careers so far. So Jen, do you want to take that one first?
I mean, I come from mining, and before I joined MachineMax, I virtually hadn't had a female co-worker for years, like a lot of years, decades, and it's just kind of crazy. And I think, so to your point, how you address it, there's multiple ways, and there's also beyond MachineMax. And I think a good example is we were hiring for a mining SME for almost a year, and we probably screened, gosh, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 100 candidates.
Yeah.
No females. And so I think there's a whole load of systemic things. So there's one about the industry that may not be that attractive historically. I think that's changing. And with what we're doing, technology enables people to enter an industry which might not mean needing to go to a site which the realities are maybe that's not best suited for that person from an equity perspective. But yeah, that was the first answer. I'm going to pass it on.
So I would also add to that what Jennifer said, that we also and it's not just in MachineMax. I know some companies, they bypass the requirements for a degree. So making sure that because not everyone's got access to education or Ivy League schools. So bypassing that and concentrating on the skills and the previous work experience to make sure that you give everyone an equal chance. And
I think MachineMax does it particularly well. I mean, one of our values is we hire the best. And the best is a really nice kind of broad definition, right? So the best might be, yes, best qualifications, best results out of university, all of those sorts of things. But the best could also be, this is the best candidate to grow in this position. This is the best candidate to train internally and to become a MachineMax expert, right? So the idea of the best is not necessarily centered just around qualifications. It's other things that make that best up. It's who the person is. It's what they bring to the table. It's their ability to grow and learn at the same time, right? And yes, of course, like you said, we make a concerted effort to bring women in at different levels. But as a general kind of equity and equality thing, we also make sure that the people who are at those levels are the best at what they do or have the opportunity to become the best at what they do. And I think that's what makes MachineMax, particularly for me in my career, the best company I've ever been hired for, because you have that flexibility in how you build out your team.
Yeah. I've often observed that, men are hired for their potentials and women are hired of their examples or experience. What does it mean? It means that if a man is showing any kind of potential to grow into that role, I've seen often at a senior level, they'll be hired. Believing in, people will believe that he will be able to do the job. Wherein in women, they need to prove that they can do the job. And what does it mean? That they need to have an experience. That if I want to be a CEO, then I need to have done a CEO role. And I will not get that job, whereas or most likely I will be considered it will not be favorable for me to not have a CEO experience beforehand. But for a man, he is a rising star and he has a potential to become a CEO. And that is such a difference in thinking from people I've seen. And it again goes back to equity versus equality. If you're giving equal opportunities to both, then thinking also needs to change. The mindset needs to be changed around that as well.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast in preparation for this about interviews, and how statistically a woman is more likely to be asked a defensive question. So how would you handle this? Whereas a male candidate is more likely to be asked a growth opportunity question. So they get to sell from the off in the interview, which, it was talking about, an example of equity would be standardized questions for roles at interview, so that there's no bias, which I hadn't thought
never
of.
even knew all of this before, but like now that you've mentioned it, you know what I mean? Like you're thinking back on previous interviews and you're going, actually, I think I might have experienced that.
I don't realize it. So
No,
much of
not
it.
even.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've kind of touched on challenges, but and like now we're realising that there's challenges that we didn't know we'd face that we've faced. But is there any other examples that people want to touch on things that they've come across, or positives where we feel like that was a good chance for us to take a step forwards?
Maybe a good example is right now we're talking about female experiences, but before this we were talking about if it's equality, it's also enabling, and this is specifically about sex, but making sure that everyone has the opportunity to raise kids, for example. And so, but as a business, if we focus on then trying to improve things like paternity leave or calling it parental leave and giving those options to both sides of whatever equation, I think that's super fair. You're a parent and you need to be able to look after your child. And I think that's something that we hold dearly and constantly are working on.
Yeah, and that's definitely my experience. And similar to you, Jen, I remember walking in here on my first day and thinking, oh my goodness, there's like more than 2 women. And, that we're a really diverse team, and how amazing is that? I've never worked anywhere like this before. But then also to back that up, or I guess as an output, I know that if I need to have some flexibility, then I have that here. And at interview, it was very clear that the output was what mattered, not when I did it, where I did it, or particularly how I did it. And I think that's really empowering from an equity standpoint.
So I have an example. We were hiring for a UX researcher, and the candidate on the other side was a very young girl, and she came in on the call. She went through the interviews and everything. And when I did the interview, she only asked me everything about myself, like, nothing about the company. How did you reach to this level? What did you do? Very ambitious, very, very, she wanted to make and like what you were saying, when you see it, you believe it. She joined this company. She had an offer from other company. She ended up joining MachineMax, though we offered her less salary. There was not a huge difference, but there was, slight difference. And she chose MachineMax just because she saw what she can become here. So that was a brilliant example, which I found that.
And I've seen that shift as well as we interview younger people, right? Like, I'm only 30, but if I interview like younger candidates, right? There seems to be this massive shift. And when I entered the workforce, it was very much like, and this might be context driven as well, because I started in South Africa, which is a little bit harder to find a job than here, but it was more about you have a job and you work as hard as you possibly can and you sacrifice everything for that job to get to where you need to be. And there seems to be this shift now to say that actually I can say very confidently, if I got an offer for another company that was paying me a lot more, but didn't have the same culture in terms of equality, equity, and opportunity as MachineMax, it wouldn't even be considered for me. Because being able to know that if I decide to have kids, it will not impact my growth in my career at MachineMax. I know that if I am feeling overwhelmed and just need a day back to myself, that I get absolutely no pushback from my reporting line, and that there is this understanding that having the healthy person at work gives you the best result. And whether that health is with regards to being a woman, and look, sometimes being a woman, you need time off for different things than you do a man, right? But giving that same opportunity for a woman and a man to have that time off that they need, regardless of the reason, giving parental leave across different genders, regardless, knowing that parents need to be parents, whether you're a mom or a dad, those things are what makes a workplace the best place to work. That's it. Yes, of course, like progressing in your career is very important, but that is what makes it bearable. You spend 8 hours, 9 hours a day in these places. At least let it be enjoyable. Yeah.
I would also add to that equity is also recognizing that what's important to you might be of a different importance to Jennifer, for example, or Shweta. So it's just making sure that everyone's got the access to the resources they need to achieve and reach their potential.
Such a good point.
Very true. Okay, so what do we think we can do to contribute to a more equitable, and I don't just mean necessarily at MachineMax, because I think we've all given a very glowing report. But yeah, what do we think needs to change in order to create a more equitable world?
I've gone for days. I mean, I think there's some things like at fundamental ages, and I mean, disclaimer, I don't have kids, so it's easy for me to say this, right? But like looking at friends' kids, and you are a little girl, therefore you're getting pink dresses and ponies, and so the conditioning starts young, and it's about recognizing that actually being okay with play with whatever you want. There are no codes, and I think that requires quite a big societal shift. And once that happens, actually a lot of these things also just kind of change automatically because you aren't boxed. And the other thing I learned that was super interesting was just if you look at the different people's strengths. So this goes back to equity and that enabling an environment where people can play to their strengths. But that doesn't mean that every woman fits in that profile either. Like, I get mocked all the time by my other half that I'm not nearly girly enough because, like you say, I don't understand. Like, and I think so, there are outliers and different personalities, even though you are classified or choose to classify as a certain sex, and acknowledging that's important too.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. There's a first world problem and there's a third world problem, right? In third world problem, I would say education. I come from a society where at age of 18, or not now, but when I was growing up, like all my classmates, by the time they were 20, 21, they were married. They are grandmoms now, right? So they have their fun generation, which is there. And here I am, winging through the life and whatever is happening. So third world, there is different things, and it goes back to equity versus, so there's different things which we need to provide. Education is so important. My parents made it a point that not only my brother, but we are also independent, financial independence. Second thing I feel is financial. How do you manage money? It is so important. It's not taught in school at all. And the risk-taking capability. It's not about like the way men think about money and the way women think about money is so different. Because it goes back to psychology of money. It goes back to what you have seen in life, the risk you can take, the way you see greed, the way you see more men would be more outgoing because from day one it will be you are the breadwinner. So you can go take risk, whatever needs to happen, and they start doing it from the day one. When Warren Buffett, he started investing at the age of 11. And my daughter is 11 and she is still in that bubble where, I'm trying to teach her, but it's still that kind of like, you have to go. So value of money, how do you treat the financial education is very, very important. And third thing is risk, like go and let them take risk. It's okay to fail. It's okay. And the earlier you fail, it's fine. You learn from it. And I think these three things are very, very important.
I love what you said about risk, because I think one of the biggest things is generally women don't take as much risk as men do in their careers. And I think that it needs to change massively. And it might be because of, like, I don't know, maybe repercussions are bigger, it might have a slight nuance to it. But I generally find that if you push back, if you take risk, if you take that leap as a woman, you always get sort of like, oh, you're so brave. Oh, like, oh, I can't believe you did that. You're so brave. Like, no, like, my brother did exactly the same thing as me 3 years later, and you're not telling him he's brave. It's just like, oh yeah, of course you were going to do that.
The outcomes are completely
Do you
different.
know what I mean? So, and I like what you were saying about your partner saying you're not nearly girly enough, right? Like, to me, equity is also about communication. What is your definition of
Yeah,
girly? You know, what is my definition of success? What do I need to have a leg up versus what does Justyna need to have a leg up? We will need two completely different things, because not only are we completely different people, but as women, we lead different lives. You have kids, I don't. We need different things to get equity to be at the same level as one another. And you can't dictate what someone else needs to get to that level, because that becomes automatically, it's got a bias to it, you know? And that, even if it's a woman dictating to another woman, there is bias to that. So if someone in a company wants equity and wants that opportunity, you need to ask them, what do you need from me to achieve that?
Yeah, that just reminded me one very good thing. Just because you're women, you come from a certain ethnic group, that doesn't mean you are not tone deaf. There are people who, being women, are also tone deaf, and there are white men who would be very, very conscious of this, like, aspect. So this again goes back to, like, really good point. It just brought me.
We're women by our own experience, not women because we're women.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good.
And I think that's where kind of like maybe people get a bit sour about this topic, is because, you know, they feel like, oh, women just become angry on Women's Day, and this is like, we're angry, like we want to fight for it. Like, no, like, we need to recognize as women our own limitations to help ourselves. Do you know what I mean? And that actually, just because, like you said, just because you have ovaries doesn't mean you're an expert. Doesn't mean you know what everybody else's experience is. And we need to be open to that, and we need to listen to that feedback in order to give people the best opportunity.
Yeah, and also not making any assumptions, because, you know.
Yeah, assumptions make an ass out of you and me, you know, worst thing to do.
Okay, so I think that's probably our kind of MachineMax take on International Women's Day in a podcast, unless anybody's got anything else to add.
Have a great Women's Day.
Yeah.
Happy Women's Day.
Yeah, girl power.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back next year, I guess.